Busy day for the Minnesota Wild as Bill Guerin wheelin' and dealin' brings in a few new names, one big departure. We'll talk about all that, plus the home and home against the Calgary Flames on today's pregame preview edition of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into a pregame preview edition of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Sports Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Just a reminder, you can find Locked on Wild on all of your favorite podcast platforms, absolutely free of charge. On today's pregame preview, we take a look at some of the moves made right at the trade deadline with Kevin Gorg. We'll also talk about the Calgary Flames games coming up here into next week. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. And as mentioned, we're joined by Kevin Gorg from Calgary here today. Busy day, Kevin. The Wilds with a few trades made, couple of welcomes, and a big departure with Jordan Greenway. Sent to the Buffalo Sabres for a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick. And obviously tough for a guy who's been here as long as Greenway has, but ultimately Bill Guerin does get a high pick in return and some cap space here in the offseason.
Yeah, it's never dull with Billy Guerin, and that's kind of the MO for a guy that has won Stanley Cups on the management side. He's won them as a player. He knows exactly what a cup contender looks and feels like. He told us a month ago he'd let the team dictate with their play how he would handle this big week that always is so important for these organizations. And Billy's clearly sending a message right now to this hockey team that he believes that they're in a position to do something and not just make the playoffs and make a run once they get in. Let's tackle the Greenway stuff first, because I think this was going to happen one way or the other. Buyers, sellers, I don't think it mattered. I think Jordan Greenway probably needed a change of scenery. And you know what? He's from upstate New York. He's got a great relationship with the Sabres head coach, Don Granato, from his time in Michigan with the U.S. developmental team. Buffalo had their eyes on him now for well over a year, and it clears $3 million in cap space for Bill Guerin and the Wild in the offseason. So, sometimes as a GM, you've got to read the tea leaves, and I think this is a player that it really is just begging for a change of scenery. Nothing against what he did in Minnesota. He's a well-liked guy in the locker room. He's just a tremendous guy to cover. But, whatever it is, whether it's the system with the way the Wild are playing kind of a defensive first game or maybe just getting out of Minnesota and trying something fresh, I think it'll be good for both parties. I really think the Wild getting a second and a fifth for a guy that, let's be honest, was going to be third, fourth line, maybe even a healthy scratch as these moves progress through the trade deadline time period. I think it was a very, very good move for both.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up Don Granato, because we've heard this year about how good of a job he did in kind of unlocking the full potential of Tage Thompson. And so I think if there is any coach out there that's going to be able to get more out of him, there really isn't a better spot that he could have gone.
No, and if you're Bill Guerin in the Wild, and you're worried about the upside that Greenway has always had, and we've always believed that, you move him to the Eastern Conference. So if he does blow up and turn into something special, at least you're not dealing with him on a regular basis in the West. And he's just one of those kids, too, that you pull for. He's just got a big old heart. You can see the frame that he possesses. You can see the hands. It just never came all together for Jordan Greenway in his time with the Minnesota Wild. It was always, he's showing signs for a couple of weeks, and then he's kind of quiet for a couple of weeks. And maybe Don Granato, the young Sabres, they're a high-octane team. He doesn't need to produce on a team like that. He can just go out there and play his game. Maybe that'll wake some things up within his skill set. And on the side of Minnesota, you not only clear that cap space, they retain all of his salary, but you get a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick. I really was taken back by that. I thought most likely they'd get a third. I didn't think they'd get two picks, and I didn't think they'd get a second. So Buffalo really sending the message that they wanted Jordan Greenway. They're right on the outside looking in for a playoff spot in the East. And so we wish him the best. Don Granato is a good friend of mine. I know the affection he has for Jordan. I think that'll be a really good situation for everybody involved.
Couple of trades to Minnesota as well, as Oskar Sundqvist from Detroit headed to the Minnesota Wild, and John Klingberg headed to Minnesota from the Anaheim Ducks. What do you think of both of those moves, Kevin? And, we can throw in Marcus Johansson. We've seen him now on the ice. You got Gustav Nyquist as well. Some savvy veteran pickups by Bill Guerin here to help out with the depth.
Specific needs, right? I mean, he knows this team can defend. He knows they can stop the puck. They've got two goaltenders playing at a high level right now, but he needed to infuse some offense into this lineup. I think Johansson's going to be a great fit on that second line with Matt Boldy. We got a little glimpse of that in the Vancouver game, and I thought they looked very, very good together. The Sundqvist one you mentioned, I think, is a depth move. It's a center position. You've got Freddie Gaudreau, who's kind of been banged up all year, but kind of persevered through some of those nagging injuries. So it gives you a little insurance in the middle of the rink, which is such a vital spot there. Clearly, Nyquist is something that you're planning on having at the tail end of the regular season or into the playoffs. He'll be a power play guy. He'll be a legitimate offensive weapon as a top six player somewhere. I don't know how that's going to mesh out, but the one move that really I think sent the most ripple effect through Wild fandom was the Klingberg move. Here's a guy that's been stuck in Anaheim, and I get the plus-minus thing. People are pointing to that on social media, but Anaheim has been in a rebuild now for a couple of years. They don't defend. They haven't had good goaltending. I don't look at that stat as any kind of a measuring stick for what he can do with this team in this system. But the one thing I do know about watching John Klingberg from his time in Dallas and now, watching him in Anaheim is he can produce offense. He will likely be a big part of the Wild's power play. I would guess that top power play unit. I think he'll be a top 4 defender, which means there's some shuffling of the deck there. And it gives Minnesota 8 options on the blue line. And I think right now you're like, well, wait a minute. We don't need 8 defensemen. Well, talk to me in 6 weeks when the end of this 82-game grind is over and you're getting ready for another grind that is the playoffs. Having 8 NHL-ready defensemen can never be a bad thing.
Especially with guys, we're seeing it with Jonas Brodin right now, especially with guys like that you absolutely can't afford to lose. The opportunity to give those guys extra time to heal up is just, it's something that a lot of teams don't get the chance to do, but it's something if you have the opportunity to do it, you better.
Absolutely. And I think if you're trying to handicap where this is going, Brodin likely gets back on his skates next week for some practice time. I don't know that we'll see him in the back-to-back early in the week. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if we saw him that following weekend when you go out to San Jose and to Arizona, and then looking at what might be a second pairing. And who knows? Maybe they'll keep Matt Dumba there. I don't know. But you certainly have the option now of Klingberg and Brodin as your second pair. You really, I think, already have that top pair locked down with Middleton and Spurgeon. And even if you move Matt Dumba to that third pairing, now you've got a Merrill-Dumba matchup. They've played together before. They have chemistry, and that's a really, really good third set of defensemen. So, all boats rise on the back end for Minnesota, and I really think the Klingberg move was the chef's kiss of all the things that Billy Guerin did here at the deadline. I got to be honest. I didn't see all of this coming. I didn't know how aggressive Minnesota would be. But as a fan of this hockey team right now, you have to be encouraged by what you're seeing.
Well, and the West is wide open. Like, we're not going to mince words on that. It's there for the taking if the Wild can keep this roll going. So it all starts this weekend with the Calgary Flames. Let's dive in and talk about where Calgary's at, because they're kind of on the other side of the coin. So we'll continue our pregame preview edition of Locked On Wilds after this. Are you looking for a delicious treat but don't want all of the fat and calories? Well, you've got to make sure to try Built Bar. What makes Built Bar so good? Well, for starters, they are all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, 100% real chocolate. They also come in some unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I don't know how Built Bar keeps doing it, but these Built Bars are so healthy too. They contain just 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. Best of all, you no longer need to wait to get yourself some delicious Built Bars. You can head to your nearest Walmart or Sam's Club to pick up a box of Built Bars today. All you got to do is swing into the pharmacy, in Walmart for your chance to grab some Built Bars, or stop by Sam's Club to pick up a bigger bulk box with 13 Built Bars in it. If you don't have one handy, don't worry. Built.com is still here to help. And so head to Built.com and order yourself a box of delicious Built Bars today. No matter how the last game went, anytime you take the field, you've got a shot with greatness. Give your team the best shot at winning by recruiting more MVPs with Indeed. If you're hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Indeed partners you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applications that meet your must-have requirements. Start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer valid through March 31st. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Continuing today's pregame preview edition of Locked On Wild. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Seth Topal joined by Kevin Gorg. Kevin, the Calgary Flames, they're in a bit of a tailspin right now, and it's been a struggle of a season all year. Seems like every time they put a foot forward, they take two steps back. What do you think about the Wild's chances to pick up a big win on the road and turn around and do it again against the same team on Tuesday?
Well, the one thing you know you're going to get right now is a cranky and desperate team in Calgary. They're 9 points behind Minnesota. They're a little closer to that second wild card spot. They lead the league in terms of one-goal losses. They're coming off back-to-back one-goal losses where they played awfully well. They outshot Boston 53-17 2 games ago and blew a game in overtime. And then against Toronto last night, it was a frustrating 2-1 loss. They have a lot of talent. They were one of the favorites in the Western Conference before the season got started. The one-goal losses have piled up. The frustration has mounted. Their coach, Sutter, is a multiple cup winner, but he's hard on his players. And there's some disconnect there right now. And having the chance to sit here in my hotel room today in Calgary and watch all the trade deadline stuff on a national side on Sportsnet, but hearing some of the local reporters kind of throughout the day here in Calgary, they're in a bad spot. So for Minnesota, you have to be ready to answer the bell. You have to be ready for a team that's going to give you everything they got. If you can weather that storm in a building that's always loud, it's always intimidating at the Saddle Dome, but if you can survive that first 10 minutes and let the game just settle in and let Gustafsson, I think, who will likely be in goal, kind of settle into his game, Minnesota can put Calgary in a real bad spot here. You can basically, even if you win one of these 2 games, you're 2 games closer to the finish line and you're 9 points up on this team. The only thing that the Wild have to avoid, and you don't think like this as a hockey player, and I'm certain Dean Everson and his coaches aren't even crossing this thought, you just can't get swept in regulation. You've got to find a way to get at least 2 points in these next 2 games, and I think it'd be a great place to do it on Saturday night in Calgary, which would basically end their hopes at that point, and then who knows what you're going to get when you come back to St. Paul. I'm just going to tell you right now, it's not going to be easy. You're going to get their absolute A game, and Boston found out 2 games ago, the best team in the league, by the way, just how good this team can be. Calgary dominated that hockey game.
Yeah, and final one here for you, Kevin, before we wrap it up. Jacob Markstrom has had a very interesting season for Calgary. I think the last time I checked, he already had 8 games in 2023 alone where he'd given up more than 3 goals. A guy with a ton of pedigree, obviously, in this league, but a guy that if the Wild can challenge him and use some of these new looks on offense to really get some good looks, this could be an opportunity for them to really put this one away early and get a team in Calgary that's struggling to kind of call the dogs off.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the advantage that Minnesota has is if it's Gustafsson in between the pipes, you got two goalies going in different directions. And both teams seem to play these one-goal hockey games. One of the teams in Calgary finds ways to lose those games. The other, Minnesota, seems to find a way, at least right now, to win these games. You got a ton of confidence on the side of the Minnesota Wild. You got a day off, which I think another thing that doesn't get talked about enough, that we have conversations with the players all the time about, is these days off where there's no team activity, where the Wild can just recharge their mind and their bodies. And it's another day off here on Friday in Calgary for these guys. So they're going to come out juiced up, ready to go. It's a hockey night in Canada game, which doesn't mean anything to everybody back in Minnesota, but to the guys in this locker room, a lot of these guys grew up watching this and know what a big deal Saturday in Canada is on the side of the National Hockey League. It's a big deal. So it's going to be a fun atmosphere. You're going to see two teams that are amped up, and I think the Wild are going to have a little wind in their sails with what Bill Guerin did today. Very exciting time right now as we come down to the final 20 games, and Minnesota has just been a team that has persevered. They haven't been flashy. They haven't been dominant. But when you look at the numbers and the way they're playing hockey right now, winning, I think 7-1-2 in their last 10, scoring the fewest amount of goals in the league, defense and goaltending can get you a long way in this league. And now if you add some offense with players like we've just talked about, the Johanssons and the Nyquists and the Klingbergs, now this is a team that can maybe start to score a little more consistently. And this could be a team that not only challenges to make the playoffs, but right now with the way the West stands, Seth, you have to start thinking about home ice advantage. You have to start even talking about a division title, and why not? Even think about a 1 seed. It's preposterous a month ago to even talk like this, but right now, the way it sits with the way this team is playing, it's absolutely right in front of them. So it's going to be a hell of a good time and a really fun ride for everybody involved.
Cannot wait to see it unfold. Kevin, thanks for the time as always. Listeners, make sure to stay tuned to Locked On Wild for all of our pre- and post-game content, as well as episodes throughout the week as well. We have plenty coming at you here over the next few weeks, so tune it in to Locked On Wild, where you can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Sports Podcast Network.